Welcome back to Lower Keys Living and the good, the bad, and the ugly side of mini season down here in the Florida Keys. Starting with the good, my original plan was to take the boat out to West Washerwoman Shoals to a couple of patch reefs to look for lobsters. But with all the lightning around in the morning, I left the boat at the dock and just paddled out into the bay here and got these six right off the bat walking out on the grass out in the center of the bay. So picked these up in about 20 minutes time and I was back at the dock by 7 a.m. with a nice haul of good sized lobsters. As I've said before, the bigger lobsters, I tend to cook those whole, and I just boiled all six of these. There's just so much meat in the upper bodies on these big ones, I just don't like to waste it. The smaller ones, I freeze those bodies and use those for chum. And this is what the finished product looks like when you cook them whole. On the bad, watch this guy bury his $500,000 streamline boat here. Missed the channel, hauling in, and he was stuck out here for a good 7 hours waiting for the tide to come in. You can see another boat trying to pull him off, but just nothing going. It was just buried on there. I did come out. I paddled out here to see if there's anything I could do to help him. I was going to bring my flats boat out to try and pull off, but when I saw how buried he was and how high up and dry he was, there was just no way he was going to get this off. I was standing in about ankle deep water here, but one good thing, nobody got hurt and not too much damage to his boat. But here, this is back the spot right after mini season. You can see all those bare spot is just where he buried that boat. And again, look how shallow it is. Take your time, know where you're going. Now for the ugly side, this patch of roofing pile, it's only about 100 feet from shore, too close in to be lobstering during winter season. And I showed you this right before mini season, I believe, in last week's video. And this is just packed with dozens of lobsters, most of them too small. So I came back out here afterwards because during the day I paddled back out and there were just so many boats jammed into the bay. And I think a lot of it had to do with the really horrendous weather, all the lightning storms, and the visibility out on the Gulf and Atlantic side were horrible. So many people packed these bays, but didn't know, one, not supposed to be within 300 feet of shore. You're not allowed to take lobsters from these debris piles. This is all man-made material, artificial reefs. This is off limits, but people just didn't listen. And again, if you go back and look at our video on the forbidden fruit of mini season, this is it. You are not supposed to be taking lobsters here, but obviously people did. Very disheartening to see because people don't even keep the lobsters whole, which is supposed to. There are just so many carcasses strewn around where you tell people would grab them, not measure them, rip the bodies off. I found these two little guys that might have been total 3 inches overall in there, but that was pretty much it. So I just asked, come on, people, there's so many lobsters down here. You don't need to take undersized lobsters, and you definitely don't need to be poaching where you're not supposed to be during mini season and the first 5 days of regular season. Again, these piles are off limits. You're not allowed to take lobsters from these. Here, I just circle back around the same pile. These are those two little guys. They couldn't have been more than 3 inches length overall. And if you remember from that video, this was just loads. Every cranny had lobster antenna sticking out. And it was just so disheartening to come out here and see what had been done. And I can get over people not knowing the rules about the 300 feet or not being able to take from these debris piles. But taking the undersized lobster is just inexcusable to me, and they sure did. This place was completely cleaned out. There's not a time I've come out before where there's not at least a half dozen lobsters, tiny ones underneath that. They are just gone. And here, this is another piece of roofing material. This one's only about 75 feet ashore. It's one I see all the time that's out here. And again, this is normally just packed with lobsters, and this should have been undisturbed during mini season, but people just can't help themselves. Thought I saw one in here, but it wasn't. It was just some seagrass. But looking around here, I found one tiny little guy on top here. And again, he might have been 3 inches, but this piece should have been packed with lobsters of all sizes. So just disheartening to see how many people just ignore the rules, kind of ruin the year-round lobstering for everybody else by just taking everything regardless of their size and their locations. So this spot I'm going to show you is a legal spot. These are the kind of things, these grass fields in the evenings and before sunrise, I can find lobsters walking in these. But here is a spot where the top layer of old coral, the hard coral, has collapsed in on itself, and it creates these great ledges. And this spot normally holds a ton of lobster out here in the bay, and this is what I look for. These are great spots, but again, there weren't even any undersized lobsters out here in this spot. And normally easily 20 lobsters of all different sizes in there on any given day throughout the year. So to see that everything was cleaned out of there, again, not a good look. Now this spot, if you remember, I showed you this in another video. There was about a 10-foot section in here where there was about a dozen lobsters hanging out on these edges. And again, this is a canal, so you're not allowed to lobster in here during mini season. But when I paddled out during the day on Wednesday, I saw the people that were renting the house. They were in and out of here, in and out of here. And I talked to the neighbor. He had told them they're not allowed to be in there getting lobsters, but they completely cleaned this out. This sunken dinghy normally holds a ton of lobsters. That was completely empty. And this ledge wall is normally packed with lobsters. And this is a place I love to come during regular season. But again, there's nothing here. And you get up here a little further, you can see how many lobster carcasses they just dumped into the water. I know the neighbor that lives next to this rental house, and he said he told them, but he said they kept going in and out all day. Somebody be in the water, hand a lobster out, they tear the carapace off, throw it back in the water, and the person in the water would just go back out. But again, all these crevices, even if they're taking the legal size lobster, there should still be tons of small baby lobsters in here. But literally everything was taken out of this spot. And again, I showed you this exact spot just a few days before mini season, and it was loaded. And I was expecting it to be that way, again, because it is not legal to take lobsters during mini season, the first 5 days of regular seasons from these locations. This little cave that's up here, or mini cave, undercut, this is normally loaded with lobsters of all sizes, not a single one in here. So at this point, I'm getting a little irritated, and I'm debating whether or not I show you the house there so people know, maybe the people that were renting it watch these and see, but just if they do, want them to know how wrong this was. So I did find just this one tiny little guy. You can see his antenna sticking out there. And again, he might have been 2 inches long. That was the only lobster along this wall that is normally just packed with lobsters of all sizes. And you can see out here behind me, it's kind of hard to see on the camera, but there are just lobster carcasses all over the bottom in here. So they didn't even bother taking them out, disposing of the carcasses properly. Again, it's illegal to dump your carcasses in the canals, but these people had no problem with it. So at this stage, I am just looking to see if there's anything left at all in here. And there's just not. They cleaned this cliff line out entirely. And despite even the neighbor telling him that this is not legal, you can't be in here, you got to be 300 feet away, canals are off limits, they ignored him. So I'm going to show you, this is the rental house. If you were staying there, please know what you did was totally wrong, and it's just heartbreaking to see. And I don't normally do this, but it was just devastating to see this kind of stuff going on. On a much happier note, I did go to a couple places that I knew were kind of out of the way. Most people wouldn't find these, even with the crowds out here. And this little spot was just packed. There had to be 50 tiny little lobsters jammed in here. Good to see. These are all tiny, maybe 3, maybe 4 inches long. Total. That's total length, not carapace length. Just tiny little guys, but good showing for the future. This little guy made himself a home underneath this little golden sponge coral. He's as happy as could be, but again, maybe 3 inches long in total length. And then there's another spot out here. Came across this imploded 5-gallon bucket here that I'll show you. And this is it. And this one, I just came across this, hadn't seen this before, but this one had to have at least 40 lobsters, I think, when I counted in here. But again, all tiny little guys, undersized guys. But I'm just thankful nobody came across this, because I'm guessing people would have poached these as well. But again, these are all good looking little lobsters for next year's season. So They will be there. Thanks for joining us. Hope you had a great mini season, and we will see you next week with a brand new video, and we'll be moving on from lobstering. Thanks for joining us.